Welcome to the Design Thinker podcast, where we explore the theory and practice of design. Hosted by me, Dani, and
me, Peter.
Hey, Peter.
Hello, Dani. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Very well, thank you. Yes. Good to be here again.
Yes, another day of recording. What are we talking about today?
Today, Dani, we've got a bit of a different episode, bringing to the surface this question of how lessons from design school can be applied to, did we say real life?
Well, I think they're applicable to real life, definitely.
Yeah.
But my expertise is more in how they're used in the corporate world.
In the corporate world, okay. How lessons from design school can be used to good effect in the corporate world? So that's our conversation. And listener, it's slightly different. If you listen to a few episodes, you might have picked up on the fact that Dani did actually go to design school. So we're going to get a chance to hear about some of her story and some lessons she learned. And yeah, we'll have a bit of a conversation about that.
Yes, we are curiously experimenting on the podcast.
Yeah, we'll interview at some point. The tables will be turned and Dani will get to interview me about something.
I've already started planning that one. So stay tuned, listeners.
So Dani, welcome to the podcast, the Design Thinker podcast. Great to have you here. And yeah, I heard when I was doing research for this episode, I found out that you went to a design school. Tell us a little bit about that.
Here's another fun fact for you. I am actually a 2-time university dropout.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So to go from that to a PhD is a long journey, which is why I always say in life, you just never know what can happen.
Yeah.
So what happened is I left high school and I went directly into university, as you do. And I was a bit lost.
Mm-hmm.
I knew that I wanted to go to law school. That was my plan. You don't just go to law school. In the US, at least, you go to a bachelor's program and then you apply to law school to get a law degree. So the normal education for that path, business, and people do history, none of which really interested me. And I was just hopping around and I'm like, this is just such a waste of time. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know how these things are going to get me to law school. And then do I even want to go to law school? The questioning of life. And anyway, dropped out twice and I didn't even understand or know that design school was a thing. I was actually so I was working this temp job and I met this other person and she was telling me what she was studying to do. And I'm like, that sounds really cool. And she said, you can go to any university and audit a class. Why don't you come audit our class? And I did. And I was just mesmerized. Design school was very hands-on. It was smaller classes. It wasn't the normal lecture format. It was really like you're doing something and there's talking, there's learning, there's doing. And this is the place for me. What do I have to do to go to design school? And because that was never my plan, I didn't have a portfolio. I can draw, but definitely not a strong artist by any means. So I had to pull all of this stuff together pretty quickly and then get my application together. And then I think universities are the same kind of everywhere. Like that, you can't it's not open enrollment, right? You've got to get your application in when they're open. So rushed to do that. And that was my entry into design school.
Okay.
Not the plan. And then I thought, okay, now the plan is going to be, I'm going to go be a designer. I'm going to do that for a few years. And then where I'm going to go is I'm going to go to law school and I'm going to do copyright and trademark type law.
Okay. Hold on. So I need to pause here. So you started an undergrad degree with the aim of going to law school. You weren't enjoying it. Nothing was grabbing your attention. You were sitting in lectures, listening to people tell you stuff. Then you discovered design school through a temp job colleague and realized how it was your thing. Then you went for all the effort of putting together a portfolio, pull it from different things you'd done, but not with the intention of going to design school. Got to design school and then this is where my just checking in, doing my best to be a non-judgmental interviewer is, then you still wanted to go to law school after that? That was still your goal?
It was still my goal. Going to law school was something that I had determined I was going to do since I was very young.
Okay.
My brain in lots of ways was designed to be a lawyer. Like I was the kid that everything for me as a child was a negotiation. Okay, I'll do this, but then I need to have this.
Okay.
So I was that kid.
Okay.
I also just really loved argument, not fighting argument, but like presenting a case. Like, I want to be able to go do these things, and here is why, that whole
Yeah.
construct of a debate and argument.
Yeah. Logical.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
And I also loved words and reading and books, and very fascinated with the idea of you take these words and you organize them in a certain way and it commutes. So I had that which is why law school really, being a lawyer appealed to me, because I saw it as you use text and words, existing text and words, to create arguments to get your way. That was my thinking.
Yeah.
And I want to know how to do that.
Okay.
For the record, I am not a lawyer.
You're not a lawyer. Okay. For the record, Your Honor. Okay.
Well, so I was talking to somebody the other day, and they're like, you have so many degrees, I assumed it was one.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Thank you for that. That's helpful and interesting. So we're now understanding where you were coming from at that point, and also why you were still headed to where you were headed to at that point. So design school, and then the goal is still to do that, then get to law school, and then incorporate both, which I think is really interesting. Thinks to oneself, wonder if we can find a lawyer who uses design thinking to talk to. Back on track. Dani. Okay, so design school. Are we there? You get to design school, or you're not quite at design school? Bring us back into the story.
Yeah, so I applied, got in, and then it was just waiting for the school year to start and the term to start, and ended up at design school. And it's probably the first time in my life where I felt like school had a purpose. I was always a good student, but I remember in high school being in geometry class and wondering why.
Okay.
Or being in some class and just wondering why.
What is the point?
Yeah, what is the point? The reason that design school appealed to me is that fundamentally in design school, you're learning how to solve problems. You're learning how to make the thing that alleviates a problem.
Yeah.
Right. In my specific case, I was doing graphic design. So that includes everything from print ads, layouts for magazines and books, book covers, logos, anything visual that you can think about that is in a 2D format. Also interesting at the time that I was starting design school is also you could go down the track of digital, which was websites at the time, which I had a real fascination with. Websites weren't back then what they are today, but they were pretty prevalent even at that point.
Yeah.
Where am I going with this?
So you're specifically graphic design.
Yes.
What you were studying.
Yeah. So I was studying graphic design and taking both print and web courses.
Yeah.
I was doing some animation work. One of the things I really liked is that you were playing in a lot of different mediums, like play animation. You had to do some basic art classes and sculpting. And so you were really thinking about how to create things in various mediums. And also thinking about, if this is the thing I want to create, then what are the things I need to use? What is the path? What is the process I need to use? So you're taking a lot of different classes. And on top of that, you had to do some English classes and math courses. And I even had to take accounting. You'd still have to do your, what we call core. Again, this is from a U.S. context. Like in the U.S., whatever degree you do, there's some core classes that you have to do.
Yeah.
Regardless of what your major is. So I still had to do all of those.
Yeah, like fundamental building blocks or things that the education system's decided that you must you must at least try to learn.
Yeah. The benefit that I also had is by the time I got to design school, I had faffed around so much trying to figure out
Fair.
what degree I was going to get. I'd taken a lot of classes. They're like, let's see how much of these classes we can hobble together to get your basic. I had taken a bunch of biology classes for some reason.
Fair.
So I had this mixed bag of classes that if you looked at, it just looked like I was Russian roulette of coursework.
Okay. I'm trying to find a gentler, kinder metaphor than Russian roulette. But hopefully you didn't feel like the gun was going to have the bullet in one of those chambers.
Here's a little life lesson though, because when I was going through this, figuring out where am I going to go, people kept telling me, just pick something and stick to it.
Okay.
Right. And I know they meant well, because that would follow up with you're smart, you're clever, you'll figure it out. Just pick something, get a degree, go out in the world and do something.
Yeah.
Which it's not terrible advice, but it wasn't, in my situation, it wasn't useful. The thing that kept me in the spiral was, what if I pick the wrong thing and then I have to spend the rest of my life doing something that I hate?
Yeah, I can relate very strongly to that. I'm sure lots of people can actually. Yeah. So it is well-intended advice to just pick something and go with it. I can see where people are coming from, and maybe that's what they did, and they got something out of that. But you chose to listen to, but not actually enact that particular piece of advice by the sounds of it.
I just figured I'm going to keep trying things. The other life lesson here is I was always a good student. I was an A student. And I remember coming to this moment where I'm going to drop out of university. That was like a big, scary thing. And that no one supported that decision.
Yeah.
But I had to back myself. And the life lesson there is that you're probably in a good position to know who you are more than any other person. And it's okay to take a step back, to go forward. I think had I just kept going down that path of what I'm at university, I can't drop out, I'm going to take a bunch of classes and just pick something and get this over with. I don't know what value that would have added to my life overall.
Yeah.
So the lesson there is it's okay to drop out, but don't drop out and become a couch surfer. Drop out to figure out what to do.
Yeah. Drop out with a purpose. Yeah. Because I think going back to the advice you were given about just pick something and do it, I think that advice can be really useful, because I suppose having maybe where they were coming from was having a degree is going to help you or give you more options than not having a degree potentially. And that definitely makes a lot of sense. But yeah, coming back to what you were saying, I think that's great to drop out for a reason or change direction, shall we say, because it might not be university or college or anything. It's like maybe something to do with the job, but change direction for a reason, have a purpose, even if that purpose is to go, right, what next? I'm itching to ask you a question actually about what was day one at design school like for you? Because you've been through this journey, you're discovering things about education, yourself, the world. You're picking up some lessons, and then you obviously audited maybe one or two classes at design school and thought, this is for me a bit of a revelation by the signs of it. But can you remember what day one was like when you turned up and then everybody else in your class is there at the same time? What do you remember from day one?
I do remember that. And one of the reasons I remember that is autumn is my absolute favorite time of the year.
Yeah.
And on the Northern Hemisphere, autumn starts in September, right? And in New York, school also starts at that time of year. And I just remember coming onto campus and just feeling autumn.
Yeah.
But in terms of class, one of the memorable moments, if you will, was, so we're all there, we're in class, we've got our shiny new Mac books out. They weren't called MacBooks at the time. I think they were called PowerBooks at the time, but Apple laptops.
Yeah.
We're all ready to go, and the professor comes in and tells us to put them all away. and gives us this scraps of paper and just very crude things. Looked like leftovers from a kindergarten craft project.
The opposite of Steve Jobs' dream machine, in other words. Yeah. Okay.
There's this pile of what honestly looked like leftover craft supplies, and asked to we're asked to create something that represents why we're here.
Hmm.
Or was it? No, it was, we were asked to to create something that represents who we are.
Wow.
So here we are, and it was literally a pile of garbage. We're all in there sorting through this, thinking, what the bleep?
Did you think it was a joke or a trick or something? You're looking around for the cameras.
I know. Am I being punked? Are we going to be on MTV? Anyway, we all go around and make this thing, and then we've got to share what it is and what it means and how it represents us.
Yeah.
And the lesson at the end was, it's not about the tech.
Yeah.
It's about the process.
Yeah.
And it's about using what you have to get to the outcome you want. And I think that lesson applies in so many different ways.
Sure.
Because in life and work, we talk about what we don't have. If I only had this, if we could do this better, if this, if that. And I saw this in organizations, and I know you're going to guide this conversation to when I got to corporate. But we see that a lot, right? We get so obsessed about the tech, and we believe the tech is going to fix everything. But it doesn't. And that was day one of design school. The tech will enable you to do some really cool things, but it's not going to make you a good designer.
Nice. Can you remember what you made?
I don't remember what I made. I think I made something with the number 8.
Oh, okay.
It's my favorite number. I love the symbolism of the number 8. If you turn it sideways, it's the infinity sign.
Yeah.
I think I made something with the number 8. That's what vaguely comes to. I'm sure I'm a chronic journalist, so I'm sure if I go back and read my journal from that time, I could figure it out. But
Oh, okay. So something to do with number 8, infinity. Nice. And that was day one. So how long is design school in the States then, Danny? How long is so you'd arrived, and how long did you spend there?
So generally a bachelor's degree in the US is 4 years.
Okay.
But because of my dropping out and collection of classes, I was able to finish in 3.
Okay.
Because by the time I got to that point, I only needed a few core classes, and then I could just focus on design.
Got you. And then just helping us build a picture of your classmates. How many people are you on this journey with?
One of the decisions that I made after I dropped out of university the first time was I was going to be very deliberate about picking a small university, because I learned that I learn better in smaller environments where I could interact more with the professor and I could interact more with my classmates. That's just a better learning environment for me. These classes were no more than 15 to 20 people.
Oh, wow.
And what like a normal university lecture class could have, I don't know, 40 plus.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. At least. Okay, nice. So you're in a place with a small number of students. Nice. 3 years. And then was every class like your first one, where I guess your assumptions are challenged, or what was the journey through design school? And or maybe you can tell us a bit about it and tell us some of the lessons you learned.
It wasn't an aha moment, because that's just not real life. But every class was very similar. The other thing about design school is that you're always presented with a challenge. And then the point of that class is you learn to navigate that challenge. And you learn by doing. So there are some classes, you do a lot of color theory, which is probably more lecture than hands-on, but then you do make some things out of the color theory that you're learning. And ironically, even though all of us that started design school spent a lot of money investing in these brand new Mac laptops, we used them it wasn't until the end of something that you actually sat down at a computer and did it. And I don't know how that's done today because it's been some years since I've done in design school.
Yeah.
But you were just learning with your hands.
Yeah.
And you were learning, and literally you're learning by doing, right? And we talk about this on our podcast a lot. You cannot learn something by reading about it. We did do a lot of reading in design school, but the reading was to inform what you were going to do, and then you were going to go do it. And that's when the learning happened.
Yeah. Okay. It reminds me that whole concept of not starting with this technology, it reminds me of, it took me a while to learn that a better way to say, let's say, I don't do these so much these days, but doing a PowerPoint presentation, like the last 10% of the work is actually, you're better off spending the last 10% doing the slides, and the other 90% is everything that comes before that, like some research, some exploration. For me, it was, post-it noting and then sketching what the slides might actually be saying, and then finally getting into the PowerPoint. Whereas I know from a technology point of view that technology is put together and constructed, marketed, and sold as though that's actually the start with the technology, because it's got all the answers waiting for you in the form of templates, etc., etc. So yeah,
one of the first web design classes I took, the first half of that first class was sketching out layouts. On paper. And learning about the positioning of things, like why is it that the top right corner is such valuable space? Why do we put something like this on the bottom and not the top? Or what does that header need to be? Once you work that out, and then you sat down on the computer, getting the website done was really fast because you had worked out the mechanics of it.
Like the top right, for example, or the bottom. Why is that? I'm asking out of curiosity because I think, again, coming back to technology, a lot of technology these days, like computer technology, can give us some amazing shortcuts and help us save time and be more, on the surface at least, efficient, not necessarily effective. But what it can also do is help us, or I think it's unhelpful to take a shortcut, miss out the knowledge, if that makes sense. So we might be creating something, producing something for somebody else, but not truly understand why it's better than something else, or why it works rather than why it doesn't. So
I think the better question to answer there is, and this goes back to understanding who you're creating for. So when we were learning about layouts, it wasn't about the layouts as we liked it. It was actually learning about, when somebody sits down to look at a website, what are they doing? What are they trying to accomplish? When you understand that, then you could be very deliberate about, okay, they're sitting down, they're looking for something. The science behind the top left corners, it's just, they've done a lot of eye movement studies. That's just considered prime real estate because it's a place that our eyes gravitate toward.
Nice.
Again, it's not about that top left corner. It's really about understanding what is somebody trying to do, and when they do that, and then you bring in the science to go, right, we know that's a space that grabs the eye's attention, so what needs to go there? But you don't know what needs to go there unless you understand who's the user of that website is. So the format for learning in design school, at least in my experience, was you do some reading, then you go do something with that reading, then you show off what you've done, and then you reflect, this is what I did and here's what happened, and then I had to do it again because I realized it was a hot mess. There's also this way of iterating. And that's design school way of showing your work. You had to show iterations of and early on, one of the things that we were taught is assume the first thing you do is going to suck. And that helps get a lot of anxiety out, right? This is going to be really bad, but I'm going to put pen to paper, pencil to paper, whatever that medium and process is. I'm just going to do it. I'm going to accept that it's going to be bad, but I need to do it so I can make it better.
Love it. Was that
another lesson?
Or was it sounds like a lesson, but was it difficult to learn, or was it something?
Yes. I found myself early on in design school always asking for extensions because I could never get my first iteration done. In a previous episode, we talked about perfectionism, and I talked I refer to myself as a recovering perfectionist because I would sit there and obsess so much about the assignment that I actually just wouldn't get on with doing it. I was told no. I never got an extension to turn something in.
Mhm.
And as I went on, I learned actually the first assignment, the first iteration, you're not really being graded on the quality of it. You're being graded on the process of it, right? How do you conceptualize the idea or conceive the idea and then evolve it over time? Which is more valuable if you could learn how to conceive an idea, conceptualize it, and then evolve it over time. That is more valuable than the idea just remaining in your head.
Yeah. 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 Yes, that's you're taking me back to our conversation about perfectionism. Nice. And also you're reminding me of a book I just started reading called The New Designer by Manuel Lima. And he quotes Paula Scher, who's a very famous graphic designer, early on. And it's something along the lines of, you need to get bad in order to get good.
Yeah.
And I guess it's the whole point of the process and having non-extendable deadlines and getting used to creating something that is just could be absolute rubbish to begin with. In the knowledge that if you keep following the process, keep iterating, then actually that will turn into gold potentially.
Mm, mm. And also to point out that keep iterating doesn't mean because sometimes you have a crap idea and iterating on the crap idea isn't going to make it better.
Yeah.
So the iteration sometimes isn't improving the first idea. It's actually going, I've iterated this enough
Yeah.
that I think this is crap, but here's a different direction I could go. Sometimes the
Yeah.
iteration is a different direction.
Yeah.
You won't know that you need to go in a different direction until you have gotten to that point.
Yeah.
You can see the different direction.
Yeah, exactly. And maybe to bring a point to life, and it's going to turn to a long-winded, potentially and definitely loaded statement stroke question, but perhaps that is just to be clear, you spent 4 years or three to 4 years at design school on day one, and in term one and in year one, you're learning basically this process of you're learning to fail, you're learning to meet deadlines. And essentially at the end of the fourth year, you're still doing the same thing. It's not like you've learned to create the best piece of work in that short amount of time by using that process, by skipping through the iteration or you've not learned to create great design, a great solution on the first attempt at the end of 4 years. That am I to hear the question in there? Does that make sense? Yeah.
It's not that you don't do this once and then you're just a master at it, right?
Sure.
You do it over and over and over and over and over in every class, in every assignment, in every term, in every year. It repeat the design process. And that's how you build the muscle. And this is where, and I'll talk about this in a little bit, this is where this idea of capability and the muscle building. Because what happens is from first year to your last year, you're still doing the same thing. There is no shortcut to iteration. But when you know how to do it, you get faster at it. You get cleverer at it. And you don't fluff around in the beginning, putting up all these barriers, being a perfectionist because you're like, that's a waste of time. I'm just going to get on with it and do it and see how I go and figure it out as I go.
Nice.
So that's like, so by the time you get to year 4, your perfectionism is a bit tired.
Yeah. It's been almost trained out of you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
You get more clever about it. One of the things that stood out to me is all of my other schooling, in all of my other education, I was taught don't fail. Having the wrong answer is a bad thing. That is something that's shameful. Never want to be in a position where you don't have the right answer.
Yeah.
In design school, there's no right answer. Assume you're going to fail. And it's this big, you're literally like, what the? It's a very, it's a very mental, it's a very mental gymnastics is the word that comes to mind because you're kind of having to unlearn everything you've been taught about what it's like to be smart. Smart means you have all the right answers. Clever is having all the right answers. If you want to move up in the world, you've got to have the right answers.
Yeah.
But in design school, there's no right answer.
Yeah.
And then you're like, what am I doing here? What am I learning here? If there's no right answer, then how do I know if I'm learning? How do I know if I'm passing the class?
Yeah. Yeah, I can imagine that was one of the kind of the big challenges to design school, especially if you come from a place of succeeding with logical things, with specific answerable questions, to then step into that world. Yeah, it's been quite the journey to make sense of that and then start going, okay, now I get it. Now I understand that, but I'm going to start learning in a different way and for a different reason.
Year one, that was really hard.
Yeah.
You're getting feedback on your first couple of iterations and it
Mm.
sucks.
Yeah.
And you're told it's going to suck.
Yeah. Yeah. And it sounds like you're not getting, again, just to maybe dwell on a point or emphasize a point, I think a misconception about design school and design full stop is that you get feedback and getting told it sucks, because it literally sucks. It's not that. It's because in the early days, at least, your teachers are telling you it sucks because you haven't explored the process in the right way. You've jumped to a conclusion, or you're trying to just show the perfect answer straight away, whereas that's not the best way to get to a great, or maybe I'm tripping myself up with my own perfectionism. Over to you. You were there. Tell us more about that.
It was this idea that you are not going to learn in design school by doing one iteration and then that one iteration.
Yeah.
The path to learning comes from doing and then stepping back and going.
Yeah.
So what we would do in design school is, let's say you're sketching a logo. You make some drafts and we have discussions. We show it to each other as in classmates. We show it to our professor. You get feedback, take that feedback, and then you do another version. And so you go through this a couple of times. So the path to success, as you're taught in design school, is that you don't make something good by creating it one time. You make it good by continuously iterating on it. So the process to learning. So when somebody gives you feedback and says, this is not good, it wasn't about it being good. It was about how do you make it better?
Yeah.
Because I don't know that anybody in my whole design school process, no one actually said, this is crap. What were you thinking? It was more, have you thought about this? How can you make sure this be this way or that way? And what you were being graded on is, how are you evolving the concept?
Nice. I like that. That the teacher as a coach almost, have you thought about, not you have not thought about, or this is wrong or this is right. It's more invitational to continue to explore and iterate. All right. Try not to be too jealous of your design school experience here, Dani.
The irony about design school, and I just have to throw this in there, when I told family and adults in my life that, look, I've dropped out of school, but I think I know what I want to do now. I'm going to go to design school. I was told it was going to be a worthless degree. I'm going to be on the sidewalk drawing portraits. And the irony is that my design degree is what's made me the most successful in the corporate world. As I've gone back and gotten other degrees. But I think in terms of ROI, that's probably the one that has had the ROI.
Nice. That feels like that should be like the mic drop moment at the end of the podcast, but actually it's a great segue into it. So tell us, what are some of the lessons you learned at design school that are still completely applicable to the corporate world?
So my intention was never to work in the corporate world. So remember, I was going to be a designer, and then I was going to go to law school and do copyright and trade law. My first corporate gig was in banking, and not in a million billion years did I think that was going to be where I would end up. Also doing the work that I thought I was going to do. So if people don't know the story, basically I got recruited by a bank. They were going through a bunch of mergers and they were stuck.
This is straight out of design school, is it? You got recruited by a bank, or?
No, nothing's ever straightforward.
Okay. Is it, maybe before you answer it, is it important where you were between design school and being recruited by the bank?
I had been a designer for about 5 years before I got recruited by the bank.
Okay.
But I'd only been out of school for about a year and a half because I started picking up design work while I was at university. And part of that is because at that time, the need for websites was really big. And
Okay.
I was just in a good environment to pick up good freelancing work and
Mm.
it's lots of reasons.
Sure.
So anyway, if you add it all up, I probably was a designer for about 4, maybe 5 years before I was hired by a bank.
Yeah.
And it was like a very random call from a recruiter. And basically, this one bank was buying all these other businesses and they were trying to figure out how do we make this one company.
Sure.
And they were really stuck. And some executive there decided what we need is somebody that has the visual skills to come in and map all these things out. Now, keep in mind, this is before we had things like journey mapping and Post-it notes. The only Post-it notes that were in offices at this time were the yellow ones. But this executive felt like if we had somebody that could visually map this out for us, and we could start to see how these things don't connect, then maybe we can make some progress. So this recruiter was out. They didn't really know what they were looking for. They found me. And I didn't understand what they were asking. I knew what they were asking before, but I'm like, that's really not what a graphic designer does. But me being curious, I'm like, sure, I'll come do that. So that's how that was my first entree into, and it's supposed to be a 3-month gig. And as I've been in banking was 13 years of my career.
Yeah. Wow.
Be careful what you commit to because
Yeah. Well,
and the path changes.
it was one of those things.
Yes.
3 months to 13 years. Yeah.
When I arrived in the corporate world, I had no other skills but my design skills.
Yeah.
All I knew. That's not fair. I had other skills, but from a working world perspective, I was a designer. And I was being asked to do something that I didn't really know how to do, and I didn't understand banking. I really didn't know anything about that world. So the only thing I could rely on was what I learned in design school. And it turns out it worked.
Wow. Really?
So one of the lessons that I learned that translated really well from design school to the business world is begin with the end in mind.
Okay.
When you sit down to design anything, you have to have a good understanding of who are you designing this for and what are they trying to do. And you don't design anything until you have that clarity. And the reason for that is when you are solving a design problem or when you are solving any problem, you have choices. And as you start making choices, the options get smaller and smaller and smaller. And that's how you get the solution, right? You start with lots of options, you make some choices, then the options reduce, and then as you keep going. But if you don't understand the end game, you don't know what choices to eliminate. So a simple example of this is one of the assignments we had to do this catalog with only 2 colors. And it had to do with budget. But if we did not understand that the end thing that we are going to create and print could only be in 2 colors, we were going to spend a lot of time creating something that when we got to the end of it, the client's going to go, this doesn't work. What I compare this to is in the corporate world, and I think I shared this example before where I got pulled into this meeting. They were developing a learning app. I kept going, okay, what is this learning app thing meant to do? And they kept talking about the learning app. And it turned out the problem they were trying to solve is that people weren't completing their compliance training in time. They didn't have this clear picture of when we create this app, how is it actually going to help? So it turned out that the problem they were solving was different than the actual problem. So in design school, lesson 1, begin with the end in mind. Where are you trying to go with this?
Nice. Who's it for? What they're trying to do?
Yes.
Nice. Okay.
The other one I'll talk about is, because I see this in organizations a lot, Assumptions are like Schrodinger's cat.
Yeah.
That wasn't the lesson taught, but that's the lesson I learned.
Oh, now you've really got my attention. Hold on. Are you sure? That sounds like a whole episode in itself, but go on. We'll do a sneak preview of it right now. Tell me, assumptions are like Schrodinger's cat.
In design school, you always had to explain if something was an assumption or if something was something we knew because we've talked to users.
Okay.
What we were told is until you have unpacked the assumption, it could be true or it could not be true, which means that your solution could work or could not work because you haven't validated the assumption.
Okay.
And so and for those that aren't familiar, Schrodinger's cat is the whole thought experiment that you put a cat in a shoebox with a vial of poison, and until you open the box, the cat is both dead and alive because you don't know.
Yeah.
Until you validate your assumptions, they're both true and not true, which means that if you build something on assumption, what you're building could or could not work. And then the other lesson you also learn, though, is that sometimes you do have to make some assumptions, right? But there are times when it's appropriate to use assumptions, but you always have to validate those assumptions.
Yeah.
And sometimes we make assumptions, but those assumptions are made, there's facts behind it, there's data behind it.
Yeah.
So it minimizes the chances that the cat is dead.
Yeah. Maybe those sort of assumptions are like being able to have a tiny little hole in the box, or being able to nudge it a little bit to see if it moves in response. Something along those lines.
But in the corporate world, I find that we limit ourselves so much based on assumptions.
Yeah.
Can't do that because we haven't. Well, okay. Or we tried that 10 years ago and it hasn't worked, so it won't work again. We do these things. We tend to take standard of practice to be all end all and assume that other ways aren't possible until we're proven otherwise. But we don't have to wait for something to happen to prove us otherwise. We can actually go test those things.
Our brains, they've evolved to make decisions quickly. That means we generally are making decisions based on assumptions a lot of the time. And in corporate life, the trap we fall into is not just slowing down to think and go, is this, like you're saying, is this an assumption we're making? That our brains are thinking they're helping ourselves by just having a shortcut. Actually, it's worth pausing to go, is this shortcut, this assumption, actually helping us or not? And also, is it true or not?
Yep.
Okay.
Not knowing is okay. Not being curious is fatal.
Yeah. Oh, hold on. Not knowing is okay. Not being curious is fatal.
When you sit down to design something, there's a lot you don't know. But the path to figuring that out, the path to knowing is curiosity. It's asking the questions, it's testing things out, it's seeing how it might work. One of the reasons in design school that in addition to learning how to do cool things in fancy software, that you learn how to, the pile of scraps from craft projects is really important, is that you can quickly pull together a model to go, okay, if this is what I'm thinking about doing, and I did it this way, how would it work? It's really being very hands-on about thinking through things, and that takes curiosity.
It's the active curiosity. So some people's mental model of curiosity might be Rodin's The Thinker sculpture, literally a piece of stone that is in a thinking posture and is thinking for eternity. Maybe that's some people's idea of curiosity, but what we're talking about here is actually not just having a question in one's mind that is unanswered, but actually figuring out how do we find the answer to that question. And that's almost always meaning doing something in the world to sense and respond.
The stark difference that I saw when I went into corporations is in organizations when we don't know what to do, what we often do is we look back. What's worked before? What else does everybody else do?
Yeah.
And those are all okay things to do. But in the context that we're operating in now, looking back at what's worked before is likely not going to work. Even if you're going to look back for ideas, test them out. Be curious to go, actually, in this situation, this worked. But if we apply it here, is it going to work? But what happens is people will say, oh, 4 years ago, this happened and we did this and it worked. So let's just do that. And then 3 years down the line, why is this still a problem?
Yeah, I like that. So looking back is okay, but maybe bringing awareness to the fact that is okay, but potentially the purpose of looking back is to find out what did not work. Not finding something that is going to work again. Right now, there's a bunch of organizations around the world that are mandating people to go to the office 5 days a week because there's a perception that previously worked. It's not necessarily the right answer to what's going to work from now going forward. Yeah, it's a good live example. Okay, so
I've got 2 more.
Okay, yep.
Empathy isn't fluff, it's everything. There's this one assignment where we were asked to create something for somebody, and we were given the description of what it was for a nonprofit, and we'd never met with them, never talked to them, and we all did something and presented it. And then in that meeting, we actually learned what they were looking for, who they were, what their needs were. And that's when it became very apparent that actually what we've created isn't going to work. We do this all the time in organizations. We create solutions and then we try to find people to use it. And this goes back to begin with the end in mind. You have to understand the people you're creating for. When we use the word empathy, it's got this softness to it. And we have this view, oh, it's a nice to have. We'll do empathy but fundamentally to problem solving, if you do not understand who you're solving the problem for, it is not going to work because you don't know what that problem feels like. You don't know what it feels like to have a problem. And well, even if you do, even if you personally experience that problem, you are just one person. Your life experience is not going to be the same as the 5 other people that are experiencing that problem. You don't have to talk to the whole world, but you have to make sure you're speaking to a variety of people. Empathy in corporate terms is very misunderstood. It's actually about having a broad perspective and taking in these various views and being able to understand those views and bring them together to create something.
Yeah, nice. Empathy is everything. Yeah, yes. Love that. And especially like this kind of somewhat a paradox, isn't it? That empathy is it's an intangible, it's an emotional thing. And often, I guess in corporate world, labeled as a soft skill, but it's actually, and therefore we can start to think of it as fluffy, and it's actually completely fundamental. It's a fundamental concrete building block to successful anything, to a successful organization.
Even a simple conversation, if you could understand the person across from you that you're having this conversation with, that conversation will be 100 times better.
Love it.
Okay.
One more?
Final lesson.
Yep.
Not final, but the final one we'll cover in this episode.
Yeah.
Embrace constraints. They're everywhere.
Yeah.
That is actually a direct quote I pulled from some of my notes from design school, by the way.
Oh, yeah.
Embrace constraints. They're everywhere. When I say that, it's, oh, yeah, that's true. But a lot of times we operate like that's not the case, right? So every assignment in design school had some crazy constraint, whether it was budget or you had to use a certain color, or you had to use a certain font that was awful and ugly. And you're like, why? There was always a constraint or 2 or 3 or 4. And what you're taught is good design doesn't happen because there is a lack of constraints. Good design or good solutions happen because you've figured out how to make something work within the constraints. And I was working in very large organizations that have been around forever and ever, and they don't have the flexibility that a startup would. I've worked in industries, financial services is a highly regulated industry. And I had a lot of innovative roles and a lot of change type roles in those spaces. And I had to figure out, how are we going to bring in something cool like digital signature into a banking environment where there's lots of regulations, a lot of legalities, documents that are signed have legal implications, right? Those things aren't going away. So how do we bring in these types of technology into banking and work within those constraints?
Yeah, nice. And I like, again, I think a lot of these lessons, I guess, designing the kind of popular culture, for some reason, people, well, I guess it's because we see like our experience of great design hides almost every lesson you've been talking about. We don't consciously realize that a great design of whatever kind that we're experiencing is as a result of the designers and everybody else actually embracing those constraints. Yeah. So yeah, I love that. I've been writing these down. So it's a bit like one of these programs where I read things about to tell you all about your life. But Dani's some of, and the careful wording there, some of the lessons Dani learned at design school, which are applicable directly to working in organizations. First of all, begin with the end in mind. So who is this for? What are they trying to do? Secondly, assumptions are like Schrodinger's cat. So we need to be continuously asking ourselves, is this an assumption or is it actual knowledge? And if it is an assumption, how do we turn it into knowledge? Number 3, not knowing is okay, but not being curious is fatal. Love that. The path to all knowing is curiosity, and that's about active curiosity, doing something in the world to find answers to the questions that we have. Empathy isn't fluff. Empathy is everything. And then finally, embracing constraints. They're everywhere. That was good hearing them back.
It's really cool to hear them back. And when I was making the transition from the design world to corporate world, those are the things that people ask, well, how'd you do that?
Yeah.
That's how I did it.
Nice. Love it, Dani.
That's the secret recipe.
There we go. So it's like one of these, you can read, yes, the secret recipe as is written down to actually be the chef and make the dish. That's the real art. I don't know how to wrap this up really, Dani. I asked you the question about your first day at design school. I'm not sure if asking about your last day at design school is going to give us a nice kind of bookend to this conversation or not. Do you remember what your last day at design school was like?
I do. So the last day of my design program, so basically you have to do this project where you design something and you bring it to life. And then there's art exhibit and people come. There's a paper you write behind it, but the thing that you are displaying. And so my project this is when microbreweries were starting to become a thing.
Right.
And I created a brand and a whole brand concept for a microbrewery. And so I designed the bottles, the labels, coasters, a whole ad campaign, a website layout, and then did all the color theory work behind it, tried to bring the story of the microbrewery to life in visuals. And it's a really cool way to end because you're bringing together everything and all the professors that you've had along the way come from the community, come to see it. And the paper that you write for it is it's like a tiny novel because you've got to explain why you've made these choices. And within your paper, you've got to show iterations.
Yeah. Okay.
So that was the last day.
Nice. That's
showcasing that.
It's memorable. For me in particular, because it's beer related, I do like craft beer especially. Nice. What a way to finish up your design school journey. And did you go for a beer after?
No, I'm actually not a beer drinker, ironically.
There we go, folks. So you don't even have to be a user yourself to design great solutions.
But I did talk to a lot of beer drinkers, and I hung out at a lot of pubs. And I visited a lot of microbreweries to both learn the stories of the people making them, the customers, so that I could bring this to life. I guess a place to close this episode off is, one, we started this with me saying my plan was to go to law school. I haven't gone to law school. Thing about life is you have to have a plan. You've got to have some direction. Yeah. But you also have to be a little bit curious.
Yep.
And open to that path changing. Because I wouldn't be today doing the work that I'm doing in organizations if when that recruiter called me and said, hey, can you come do this?
Yeah.
It wasn't for me being curious in that one moment.
Yeah.
I'd probably be in a very different place right now.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, there's saying yes to certain things. It's a whole other episode on that, perhaps. Thank you, Dani. That was a really enriching conversation for me. I loved hearing those lessons you learned, and how they apply to corporate world, and just maybe it's almost myth dispelling about what happens at design school and what you learn at design school, and I'm sure there's lots of technical things that we didn't cover on graphic design that you learned as well, but the fundamentals that can be applied to all walks of life. Some of them we covered there. So thank you so much for sharing part of your journey there. Really appreciate it. And yeah, I hope you got something from that listener.
Hope you did too, and it wasn't just me blabbering about or going down memory lane. Thanks, Peter. This has been awesome.
Yeah, thanks, Dani. That was great fun. I look forward to having the tables turned on me.
Yes. An episode coming soon.
Coming soon.
Bye now.
All right. Bye, everyone. See you next time.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
See you next time.